This video presentation will look at Module B, the critical study of texts. This presentation will focus on The Wild Swans at Coole, a poem by W.B. Yeats. Before beginning to analyse The Wild Swans at Coole, it's very important to go back to what the rubric and the module elective require us to do in Module B. I invite you to take a look at the Module B critical study of text rubric. Importantly, it's significant to note that students are required to have, for this particular module, additional literary critics to assist them, as it says in the first sentence, to engage with and develop an informed personal understanding of their prescribed texts. In addition to the ongoing awareness, insight, and appreciation that students gain for the suite of poems, these 6 poems that are prescribed for Module B for W.B. Yeats, it's important that students are guided by the thinking and insights gained from considering the thoughts and reflections of key literary critics. The second sentence of the module rubric is a significant one also. It is through critical analysis and evaluation of its language, content, and construction that students will develop an appreciation of the textual integrity of their prescribed text. It's important to note that overall textual integrity is achieved by considering the way in which language, content, and construction interact with one another in order to provide an overarching harmony for the text. Here is an extended version of the Module B rubric, again reminding students to consider very closely in the elective that has been chosen the way in which students are expected to analyse material and analyse the key themes, use of language, and the composition structure used by Yeats in order to construct meaning for his audience. In looking ahead to Wild Swans at Coole, we start to look at a couple of key factors. The poem comes from Yeats's 1919 collection and focuses very strongly on themes and tension between the poet's thought and his art. For example, between man and nature, as well as youth and age. It's important to look at the way in which man versus nature and youth and age are ideas that come together and can provide some contrasting tensions. It is the young man who looks ahead at his age, but it is also the older person who looks back at their youth with a sense of loss, and that can create tension. And we'll look at that a little bit more as we start to make our way through this analysis. The symbolism of the swans is significant to consider. They are connected to the sky or heaven. The whiteness of swans links them to light and beauty. The swans are very symbolic creatures in this and lead us into a deep consideration of where Yeats is going with his poem. The setting of the poem is the Coole Park estate in Islands, County Galway, where Lady Augusta Gregory, who was Yeats' patroness and of course artists at this particular period of time, didn't make a significant amount of money, whether they be literary artists, musical artists, theatrical artists, playwrights, would rely very much on the generosity of wealthy benefactors to provide them with ongoing commission or ongoing financial support to continue with their work. So indeed, Lady Augusta Gregory, as a patron of Yeats, a devotee, someone who sponsored his work significantly, had Yeats come to her estate on a number of occasions. And it's here at Coole Park where Yeats encounters the swans. The significance of Coole Park to Yeats is worthy of consideration. He admired Coole Park for both its beauty and setting, but also the ceremoniousness. And that's a beautiful word to look at here, that in fact the daily realities, the beauty that surrounded Coole Park provided Yeats with a rich consideration of the ceremony of life, the interconnectedness of the symbols of life, the swans, the human existence, the rural beauty of Coole Park, and the way in which that all these factors came together as if to be a ceremony of beauty. The poem is marked by both mystery and ritual, and that will be subsequently discussed in further detail. The Wild Swans at Coole represents a deliberate attempt to appeal to rustic qualities of the landscape. This is a poem that appeals very much to the way in which natural, raw, physical beauty appeals to the senses, that in fact it is the landscape that draws in Yeats as well as his audience into the deeper meanings and mysteries of life. The structure of the poem is done in this ballad style that switches in both tense and time. It's very important that you note that Yeats changes his tenses as well as looking at the way in which over the course of the poem The audience is taken through different periods of time, and this reflects again Yeats's progression through his career as a poet, the career as an artist, the constant reflection that is available to him now as time lapses past him. The poetic structure is done in the form of a lyric poem, which is formed to achieve closure at the end of each verse. Each of these stanzas in the poem are given a particular meaning, and the construction and structure of each of those stanzas allows particular ideas to be developed before moving on to the next stanza and the next idea to subsequently arise and then be developed in the context of that stanza. Yeats is fond of questions in his poetry, and again the rhetorical question appears here. It's a significant poetic technique to note. Part of the 1919 collection has been mentioned previously. Yeats, it must be noted, is in his 50s and is entering the modernist period of his career. Remember, the Raphaelite, the French symbolist, and the modernist influences on Yeats, his development as a poet, as well as the development of his writing, are significant to have in our minds at this point. Yeats, though, in his chronological age, in his mid-50s, at this period in time, is getting into old age or older age. He's past midlife. And it's this point here that, being past midlife, Yeats finds himself in a period of deep reflective questioning. Coole Park is a constant in his life. It is a place that he's come back to throughout his youth and now into his post-midlife stages. While the swans are ageless and the surrounds of Coole Park have remained fairly static or unchanged, Yeats finds that he, as he returns to this particular place, which is same, unchanged, finds himself in a position where he is conscious. He is openly conscious of the changes in him and what he's starting to feel, the sense of time. The passage of life has moved on, and he is now finding that as life will go on, the natural beauty of the world will continue. In fact, his mortality is catching up with him, like is the case with all of us. We will all leave this earth at some point. The world will continue, though, after our time on earth. The word wild used in the poem's title suggests that the poem is both natural and uncontrolled. The swans are majestic and beautiful, but they are not under Yeats's control. Yeats does not own the swans. In fact, the swans are the property of Her Majesty. The swans belonged to the royal family. They were of the Queen. They were not of anyone's ownership. And so the fact that the swans were excluded from any ownership is a further reminder of the fact that there's a wildness to the swans, that in fact these are kept by no one. And as Yeats reflects here, Yeats finds himself in a position where he's considering the fact the human beings and the universal human experience is very much one about being owned or possessed by time. We are owned by our circumstances. We are possessed by other people. We are possessed in our own ways of thinking. Yet the swans answer to no one. They have a complete and unabiding freedom where they move where they will. The unchanging swans, as been mentioned, appear this way in contrast to the persona, and this is the important contrast to note. While all's changed for Yeats, the reality is that for life of the swans, on a practical level, the life is unchanged, but it's the symbolic significance of this you really need to note. There is an unchanged nature in the freedom and wildness of the swans. But that's got to be contrasted to the persona, and indeed that taps into the universal experience. Life for all of us will continue to grow, evolve and change in ways that we like and ways that we are uncomfortable with, and that's where Yeats is moving with this. Yeats is conscious of his own mortality, has been discussed, amongst a world not growing old, and there's a timelessness, and that's the key word here, timelessness. The surrounds of Yeats seem forever fresh at Coole Park. There's a real sense in Yeats that the surrounding is always new, it's always open, and it's always timeless in the way it appears to Yeats. The self-consciousness, and that's what you need to note there, the self-consciousness of Yeats is that in fact the swans' hearts have not grown old. And look at that symbolic nature there. The symbol of the heart. As we all grow old, there's a sense within each of us that sometimes our hearts will go hard. We will lose the capacity to feel empathy, to feel trust, to feel love as we grow older in time. But yet for Yeats, he says the swans are unchanged. It is the persona who is increasingly damaged and maybe even a little bit hardened or skeptical about life. The way in which he looks through life, the lenses he looks through life, reflects a hardened heart. Maud Gonne, of course, we know Maud Gonne. Yeats proposed to her for the last time in 1916. Of course, Yeats had multiple proposals to Maud Gonne, the love and affection of his life, yet Maud refused his proposals of marriage each time. As has been considered previously, we understand that Maud was married to Sean McBride. However, by the time Yeats had proposed to Maud for the last time in 1916, Maud Gonne and Sean McBride had been separated since 1905, so needless to say, Yeats wasn't moving in all too quickly on a woman who had become newly separated. But again, these reflections follow the last time Yeats knew he would propose to Maud. Here he is, rejected for the last time, sitting at Coole Park all alone, and these swans lie before him as strong symbols that become the focus of his reflection. The anthropomorphication, the connection between humanity and the swans. The swans are not human beings, and Yeats gives them, through anthropomorphization, he gives them human characteristics, and that's what it is there. He gives non-human objects human qualities. And we look at the way in which the swans, as we know, mate for life. They find one partner and they couple with that particular partner for the rest of their mature lives. And Yeats sees very much the difference between the reality for swans, non-human objects, and his own lost sense of attempts to couple with Maud Gonne. The work in the Celtic twilight, and this is an interesting one here. This is twilight in the poem. Twilight, of course, is the period before nightfall. It's the late afternoon, and Yeats sees himself very much at Coole Park in the late afternoon of his own life. And in Irish folklore, and at Lady Gregory's here, there is a significant cultural connection between this twilight of one's life and the surrounds that Yeats finds himself sitting amongst at Coole Park. There's a relative simplicity of the folk tradition, and that needs to be remembered when looking at Yeats's cultural context. Let's look at the stanzas of Wild Swans at Coole. The autumn trees are in their autumn beauty. The woodland paths are dry. Under the October twilight, the water mirrors a still sky. Upon the brimming water, among the stones, are 59 swans. So we look at stanza 1 here. The first 4 lines is a ballad stanza it's an ancient form of English poetry. There's a common measure and a common metre. There's a variation between 3 and 4 beat lines that are common across English hymns. The setting in autumn immediately introduces the idea of declining in the life of October twilight. Again, the season of autumn in October in the northern hemisphere here. There's a decline in light because the days are getting shorter in autumn, leading into the European winter. This is also symbolic of the twilight of Yeats's life. Remember, in his post-50s period, he has a time to reflect now where he looks at himself in the twilight of his own life. The way in which he counts the swans, 59. The presence of swans has a mystique about it in their curious numbering. In the way he doesn't say 59 or 59, he gives it in this peculiar way. The symbolism in terms of the swans, they symbolise much more than their natural presence. The significance of the swans to the persona is the large number of swans represent the generous spirit of renewing nature, of wild beauty. The swans will continue to multiply. And the recurring symbol in Yeats's poetry, the soul of poetry itself, and the eternal swan. Looking at stanza 2. The 19th autumn has come upon me since I first made my count. I saw, before I had well finished, all suddenly mount and scatter, wheeling in great broken rings upon their clamorous wings. Numbering in stanza 2, the 19th autumn establishes another tension between Yeats's human raging and the swan's apparent timelessness. Now, As Yeats starts to move into a period of getting older, the raging I put there is nearly an internal anger. There's a sense of loss here as Yeats grows older, and the swans apparently remain timeless. They don't appear to have grown any older in the 19 autumns that Yeats has been there to count them previously. Wheeling in great broken rings upon their clamorous wings indicates the indifference of the swans to Yeats's presence. Life will go on for the swans regardless. Yeats is not a dependent feature in their lives. They don't need him, but he is drawn to them. The poem is a masterpiece of sound devices as you listen to the way in which the metre progresses throughout the poem. Mirrors a still sky. Sibilance here, and the brimming and the long vowel sounds in stanza 2, 19th, count, mount, wheeling, and clamorous contribute to a slow, ritualistic tempo in the poem. This adds to its reflective nature, as well as looking at the idea of the twilight and fading life. Looking to stanza 3. I have looked upon those brilliant creatures, and now my heart is sore. All's changed since I, hearing at twilight, the first time on this shore, the bell-beat of their wings above my head, trod with a lighter tread. The unity between the poet and nature. So the bell beat of their wings above my head. This emphasizes again that freedom of nature. There's a beauty of the swans being able to take themselves into the air through flight. Looking at the romantic influences on Yeats here and the romanticism reflected in the poem, we see here in the poem that Yeats yearns for the past. He hopes again for the past that is now obviously beyond him because he's in the present. His youthfulness, of course, which is a feature of his past, and it's a feature of all of our pasts, and an innocent communion with the natural world and its creatures. He yearns for a time when life seemed simpler. Yeats regrets, and this is a horrible sense to have, and this is the tension in the poem. This is where its strength comes from. He regrets the passing of poetic inspiration. Here he finds himself towards the end of his poetic career, and he has a sense that within him, as life has faded in the twilight of his days, he finds that his poetic inspiration has too dried up and it's running out. The inspiration that he's had in the years that have passed has seemed to have left him at this point. The bell beat of the swan's wings and the accompanying reference to a light tread of his feet, and these feet in sympathy with the natural rhythm that we recall a former time, and Yeats recalls a former time, when inspiration came more naturally in his feet. And this looks at the idea of walking with a spring in your step. We know people who are able to walk fairly carelessly, they walk with a great energy, they walk with their head held high, engaged and interested in life. This is not Yeats anymore. Yeats is reflecting on a time now that he seems that he drags his feet. His legs and movement is heavier, reflective of the reality here now that Yeats feels that although the swans move with a bell beat, a quick, crisp movement, Yeats is schmoozing as he makes his way through life now at a slower pace. We look now to stanza 4. Unwearied still, lover by lover, they paddle in the cold, companionable streams, or climb the air, their hearts have not grown old. Passion or conquest wander where they will, attend upon them still. There is a significant symbolism here. The swans represent creativity. Unlike the persona and the fading poetic inspiration that Yeats is reflecting on here, the swans are unwearied by mortality, which is eventual death. They're unwearied. They have a boundless and continual energy. Preoccupations with midlife and dying, which now flood into Yeats's mind as he looks upon the swans. Yeats, at the time of writing, was in his mid-50s, as been mentioned previously, and was increasingly preoccupied with the failing powers of his body and artistry. The swans represent a vivid contrast to their condition. And this is a significant idea for Yeats because as Yeats looks at his declining capacities, and again, by no means is he on death's doorstep here, but Yeats looks at that post-midlife period as a period of decline, and he sees himself in decline both in his physicality and in his art. Their hearts have not grown old. Passion or conquest wander where they will, attend upon them still. Here Yeats reflects again that the hearts of the swans are unchanged. They maintain a youthfulness. And passion and conquest, which is so much a characteristic of the young, as they make their way between adolescence and early adulthood before midlife, the young are impassioned and engaged by this sense of conquest in life, a passion and sense of conquest which Yeats is ruminating on having lost in his life that is to follow the post-midlife period. The final stanza, stanza 5. But now they drift on the still water, mysterious, beautiful. Among what rushes will they build? By what lake's edge or pool? Delight men's eyes when I awake some day to find they have flown away. Stanza 5 closes disturbingly. The persona imagines a time in winter, literally and metaphorically a period of infertility, of both life and creativity. And this is important. We look at this season of autumn in the Northern Hemisphere in October, that fading into winter, the shorter days, the cooler temperatures, the freezing temperatures if you're in certain parts of the Northern Hemisphere. But we look at the persona here, Yeats, imagining a time. He feels his time is nearing in terms of that progression into winter. He's infertile, unable to give life. And he's not talking about literal male infertility here. He's talking about the way in which he's not able to give life or receive life. And this is the symbol of when the swans have flown away. What does it mean when this inspiration, which is the swans who have previously given him so much inspiration, have flown away or no longer have the capacity to inspire him in the same way? As you see that picture of the flying swans on the right there, Yeats sees the swans carrying both his life and his poetic creativity away with them when they fly off. In fact, that those elements of him have left him and flown away. When the swans leave Yeats and fly off, they take with them the ideas of youth and the symbolism of creativity. And now they drift on still water shows both the swans and the water as stationary. They just drift. They're present for the moment, but can easily be moved and easily move on. Mysterious and beautiful. The two multi-syllabic words here slow the reader to a stop. Mysterious, beautiful. We get that idea of that reflective tone that Yeats is creating in the poem. Among what rushes will they build? When I awake some day to find they have flown away. This leads us to the rhetorical question and shows the persona's loss is climactic and inevitable. This is a particularly powerful poem and one that I hope this short presentation has given you the opportunity to unpack in greater detail.